American University in Bulgaria.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. This is another event organized by Political Science Department and supported by Political Science Club. I would like to thank to library staff and the members of Political Science Department for putting a lot of effort to organize this event. Apparently, we have more people than we expected since the semester is going to the end, but I guess you all can sacrifice a little bit of comfort for the quality of this lecture. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you all to turn off your cell phones so you don't have any interruptions. And if you want to go out before the end, please use as quietly as possible. Now, please give a round of applause for this sponsor.
Good evening. Before I start, some of you may have found cookies or chocolates on their chairs, just because in 2 days' time it's St. Nicholas. For some countries in Europe, they celebrate the day, and generally you offer it's a smaller holiday than Santa Claus, so they offer cookies or chocolates. Yeah? St. Nicholas didn't get the message that there will be that many, so wasn't prepared. So I have two requests, if possible, to be nice to the ones around you. And secondly, because I got permission to put them on the chairs, not to eat them now and to eat them afterwards. Okay? All right. This has started jokingly. So as a topic, as an idea, as something to do with. Has started over coffee conversations with one friend in particular, and then with more. And it has grown to the point that at some point this semester I was considering a course for next semester. It didn't happen because I wasn't convinced that I could manufacture 26 different lectures. And it may sound cool, but I mean, there is many different Game of Thrones or varieties of topics that I could have at that point at least manufactured. And then I thought that I had played with that for so long that I might as well try and put them together and see what comes out in a lecture like this. TEDx was something that I enjoyed very much, and I thought that I might as well try another one differently and on my terms. I obsessed a little over the library, so I turned around the club guys once because they had another room, and then I thought if I'm talking about books and movies, might as well be among books. The other thing that I wanted to say before it starts is that this isn't a conventional research paper, because I have some of my kids are here that I do research methods. So this is not a methodological, theoretical review, whatever you have to do for that class. This is what academics do when they want to sound cool, is to link academia to pop culture. And we pretend that we connect. Okay? So that's what's going to happen a little bit, I hope, or a little bit more. So it is fair to say that portrayals of politics as a muddy, backstabbing, sordid world characterized by ethical minimalism and characters that are ready to sell their souls or lose their souls for the benefit of some illusion of power far outnumber the more positive, rosy, good government, good practice, common good type of portrayals of politics. And whether they deal with democracies or whether they deal within authoritarian, totalitarian regimes, the tendency is to look and see how politics distorts and corrupts human behavior. Similarly, the fiction world or fiction movies and fiction cinema deal or address issues such as sources of power, the use of power, justification for war, just cause for war, and the use of office, the attempt to influence or abuse power. A lot has been done, and critics excel at trying to find allegories between real life or historical characters and fiction characters. There's been, for example, between Ned Stark and this guy over here. He's little, but he should be a lot bigger in terms of intellectual dimension. Thomas More, who is the guy that becomes Lord Chancellor for Henry VIII. This one becomes the hand of the king. So it's a similar position. And similarly, both of them have difficulties to adapt to the office, and they don't bend just because they are friends of the leader. Yeah. There's also been similarities between the syndrome of the Lawrence of Arabia and somebody like poor Atreides and Jake in Avatar, the outsiders that integrate natives and become leaders of this population, or they become part of them, and they command enough respect that they become leaders for these populations. There is also female characters that are linked to larger-than-life historical characters, a la Elizabeth I or Cleopatra. Not all characters are necessarily individuals in power, so movies don't center only on leaders, though on leaders more than on others. But it can also be outside characters, such as a commander, like a military commander like Patton, and smaller characters, but influential characters within their own rights. Some of the allegories audiences make up because we like to make this comparison, and it makes them friendlier. We identify with somebody and say, oh, but this is like such and such, right? So some of them is because the audience wants to make them, and they make them differently depending which audience watches the movie or reads the book. Or their conscience. J.K. Rowling acknowledged that Voldemort has been grounded, or she thought about Hitler when she actually wrote the book. Similar goes for Avatar. James Cameron said several times that, yes, he meant it. He meant to make references to post-colonialism, to the war in Iraq, to the war in Vietnam. So in some cases, it's a conscious decision. In some cases, is what the audience chooses to interpret. Yeah? It is also true that the fiction worlds or fiction movies or cinema adapt to the world in which they actually emerge. It's not here, but I remember when Matrix Reloaded came out, this was at the time of the Coalition of the Willing, the war in Iraq, and the peak of the Francophobia in the United States. So the French fries become freedom fries, and there is a lot of anti-French sentiment, right? And in Matrix Reloaded, there is a guy who owns a nightclub who's called Hell. Right? And I don't know if you remember, but the owner is known as the Merovingian or the Frenchman. Couldn't have been any other possible citizenship or nationality but that. Yeah, at that point. The other thing is with the female characters, who, by contrast to the moment where the books emerge, they grow in the movies when they come out. She's not here, but one character like this is Arwen in Lord of the Rings. When in Lord of the Rings in the books, she's more wifey and witchcrafty type of character. In the movie, she swings swords and rides horses. But because by 2000, this is girls' power, and it's not late 30s, early 40s when the woman stood at home, right? So the world was ready for somebody else. And Lord of the Rings, God bless them, is not a very conducive to female character type of environment, so they needed to build some, right? Though when they emerge, they make a splash, like Galadriel, because without her, nothing happens, right? But it's only one, and then another one, and then the Shield Maiden. Okay. The other thing that the fiction writers, most of these are actually book adaptations, which says something, with the exception of Avatar. So the writers of fiction cinema or fiction literature are not constrained by historical records. So they can play more than the ones that are actually have to deal with real life events. Right? And then they get criticized for, oh, but this doesn't happen. Right? Although, if you ask somebody like Quentin Tarantino, he didn't care much when he did Inglourious Basterds. So it depends who you're asking and who does what, right? On the Django Unchained, similar story, okay? The allegories, this is one of my allegories and one of my favorite allegories, because there is no leader, military leader ever that's going to give a speech in front of the army and is not going to be compared to Henry V and the Battle of Agincourt. Shakespeare made that what it is, right? So Aragorn at Black Gate, this is what he does. He's in a similar situation with a small army, he is outnumbered, and he gives a speech that is similar. It's also a different world because his speech is 1 minute and 40 seconds. This one is 5 minutes and something, because in the 17th century time was not a commodity and they could afford it. So the common themes between, so why do I say that it resembles apart from the context? Both of them talk, this one talks about a band of brothers. Aragorn says, you know, one day you will betray the guy next to you, but this is not that day. So it's a spirit of community. And both of them say that as a result of this battle, and if you die in this battle, the scars that you will carry are a matter of pride and a matter of glory. Yeah? Now, what world do they inhabit? So what types of system of government do we have? It's rather ironic that for a world in which we're now, and if you transfer Fukuyama's end of history to end of ideology, we have pretty much a dogma around liberal democracy. Or the fascination with all these movies in which all of them, these are feudal systems, monarchic systems, some of them divine rulers, like in the case of Dune, right? Some of them are also, I mean, styled, even in the way they carry their heads and, I mean, the hair and the way they're dressed in reference to, so Geoffrey with Caligula or Nero. Yeah? So these are not democratic regimes, right? But if we look at them closer, they're neither dominatio, so it's not necessarily regimes of the rule of one for res privata, for private gain, but rather what Tacitus would have liked to see, which is principatus or principalities, which is the rule of one, but for res publica, so for everybody else, right? So there are, and Montesquieu would have said, well, monarchies, but the monarchies are ruled by one principle, the principle of honor. And within Game of Thrones, you hear that over and over again, right, that it's a matter of honor. Although if you listen to Lord Baelish, honor is what slows you down, right? So this is the predominant characteristic of polities. They tend to be monarchic, autocratic, right? But we have some democracies, right? The wizard world is a democratic world. The minister of magic is elected. We don't quite know by who, because they never say, but it is elected. I mean, for better or worse, right? The Shire, the Shire, it's a very idyllic community. They have a mayor, okay? And they only have one common service, the post office. Other than that, there is nothing there, right? And they obey because it's towards their benefit to obey or follow rules, okay? By contrast, you have autocracies in a world like Mordor. There is a difference that it's worth pointing out. Agricultural rural communities, a la the hobbits and the elves, they live in blissful, democratic, communitarian spirit. Industrialized, machine-driven societies, they're almost all of them autocratic, totalitarian, imposition, okay? Now, there may be, because both of these guys that I mean, it's not, both of them are Tolkien, but for example, with Frank Herbert, Herbert, like Tolkien, were in the war. Tolkien as an IRA pilot in World War I and Herbert in World War II. So both experienced war in front of a power that excelled at machinery. So they associated totalitarianism and autocracy to industrialized situations and mechanicized situations. Right? We also have some examples of oligarchy, like the cards in Game of Thrones. There are 13 noblemen. Yeah? So this is, but this is not that common. So this is rather an exception. Okay? Now, what world is this? What principles govern this world? Well, there has been, I mean, the Game of Thrones has been berated for glorifying a Machiavellian world, this is a world of realistic thinkers, yeah? A world in which good laws don't exist, only good arms, like Machiavelli would say, right? So where, okay, capabilities matter, where manpower matter, where might is right, yeah? Money matters because, you know, a Lannister always pays his debts. Right? And knowledge matter, although, and I'm sorry because I can't run the video because I can't do that scene justice, although Lord Baelish here finds out to his own detriment that knowledge doesn't matter that much and that in the end power is power. Right? When she starts patrolling everybody else around and say, kill him now. Oh, I mean, no, wait a second, maybe not. Maybe yes, turn around, 3 steps, close your eyes, do whatever, right? So in other words, I couldn't give something about your knowledge because you don't have power. Yeah? It may be an illusion that it matters for you at a long distance, but not short term. Yeah? Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier because he didn't cross the line or he didn't move from where he was, and he had knowledge. The Roman soldier didn't, but he had a spear in the end. Yeah? Okay, so again, what world is this, and why do they say that this is the paragon of realist thinking? Well, this is a Hobbesian world in which life is short, nasty, and brutish. In which, like I said, might is right. And where, like Lord Baelish says, echoing Kenneth Walls, anarchy is what is the perpetual state of international system. Okay? Baelish says it's chaos. But like Walls, Baelish sees in chaos an opportunity to increase power if you climb the ladder is all there is. Yeah? And the climb is what helps you to gain it. Okay? Now, is it enough to say, well, you know, this is all Machiavellian and all that matters is power and power for power's sake? There is some hope for social constructivists that, you know, would like to say that, well, not quite, right? Because, first of all, armies, military might is not always enough, right? Ned Stark, like Robb Stark, win all the battle, yet they die, both of them. So it's not enough, right? There are laws. Different laws, but laws. There is customary law. The Red Wedding is an example of customary law. It's a brutish law because they all die, but it's the law of the land. Yeah? Or they're the old ways, okay? And they reference to them. These are how we do it. Okay? There is also King's Justice. Catelyn could not have been capable to arrest Tyrion by herself, but by raising the banners of her father, so legitimacy, right? And there is a trial for Tyrion, and he wouldn't have been able to escape if it wasn't for the rules of that trial. So there are norms, okay? There is also, like, you know, somebody like Lord Varys, I can't remember the name of this guy to save my life, the nobleman from Cart, who transfer the message that you can have power by creating the illusion of power. In his case, he pretends to be rich, he acts as if he's rich, and therefore everybody believes that he's rich, right? Lord Varys will say, well, power resides where men believe it resides. So it's not whether or not I carry it, but whether or not you believe that I have it. Right? Now, it may be worth pointing out that the characters that tend to support views like this are not characters in office. Yeah? So these are otherwise weaker characters. It is to their benefit to create this illusion that power is not power, like she would say, but power can be manufactured because it enhances their own presence and their own ability to control or have influence at the court. Okay? Now, there are almost all the political myths present within the fiction worlds. The 4 big political myths identified by a guy called Raoul Girardet were the origin, the myth of origin. Where do they come, right? And this grants some legitimacy. They were the survivor, the followers of the first of men, right? They come from there. They do this. They're the descendants of I don't know who, right? Conspiracy theorists, who are always, I mean, it's not just the Balkans. It's everywhere they function. This is one of the traditional fundamental myths. The myth of the golden era, where you want to arrive, okay? In the Lord of the Rings is clear what they want to achieve, right? And that's a promise, okay, for the future. But the myth that dominates everywhere is the myth of the Messiah or the Savior, the one, okay? Partly driven by religion. In the case of Dune, that was helped because there's a Ben Gesserit legend that builds this knowledge that there will be a Messiah that's coming. And so it creates the framework for the population when he comes, that they identify with the legend that they heard, right? That they expect him to come. It takes them by surprise that he comes a little earlier than the Ben Gesserit actually announced, but still, right? Religion in this, in all of the fictionalized worlds are treated pretty much the same way that they've been treated in, by philosophers from Machiavelli to Montesquieu to Marx to Freud, meaning as an extremely efficient instrument of manipulation and of intolerance. For the gods are jealous gods. Yeah? There is a difference with the Game of Thrones because there is religious relativism. They're very accommodating. They swear by the old gods and the new gods the whatever comes. So it's pretty, you know, whoever, it's fine. It's not that we have to replace them, take this one down. No, they're all together. It's okay, right? What's the difference? The difference is that the Game of Thrones is written in the 1990s. Which if we follow Zygmunt Bauman's logic that this is a postmodern world, the postmodern world doesn't rely upon one truth. And it shows, even though most of the allegories are made with medieval Europe, but the guy can't help it, right? Marx said that you're the product of the context in which you're born. So there is something in it. There is more of a religious pluralism in the Game of Thrones than in others. The only tension you have in the Game of Thrones is the one between pluritarism and multitheism. Monotheism and pluritarism, sorry. Because like I said, and in particular, and you know, one god is a jealous god, right? Now, the rulers, the idealized rulers, are the rulers that Machiavelli always hoped that they will be. The ideal prince, the one that is going to be both feared and loved. Yeah? And if you can't be both, you should better be feared. But the ones that have both, and there are some, and Daenerys Targaryen is possibly one of the best examples, but so is Paul in Dune, and maybe even more so because he also has religion. He actually has everything. He's a mentat, he can, you know, control wills, he has the atomic bomb, he has the manpower, he has the religion, he has everything he wants. Both of them, though, they are also, like Machiavelli actually recommended, that they represent the lower classes, not the upper classes. And both Daenerys and Paul are leaders of rebellions or of underclasses, the classes that have found a voice through these guys, right? And so riding in front of them, it gives them more presence, legitimacy. And for example, for her, suddenly, it's not anymore a selfish pursuit of power for herself because she sees herself as the heir to the Mad King, and in his case, to right the wrong that was done to his father, but that they represent some population that have been wrong, so they do this for them. Right? So at that point, their legitimacy has enhanced their own, has transgressed their own and becomes more than this. Where are the women? Well, the women are like almost everywhere you would expect them to be, at home, mothers, wives, daughters, sisters. And when they have geopolitical roles, they are geopolitical pawns for others. Yeah? They are subject to alliances because they are given in marriage to somebody. They are sources of information. Brothels are spectacular sources of information for Lord Baelish, and that's how he collects information, right? So they're tools, right? When they have leading roles or roles with power, a lot of them come from the fact that they're wives and mothers, so they defend their kids. Yeah? Molly Weasley, right? When she defeats Beatrix, she does it to protect her kids. She wasn't up till then the big fighty warrior, right? But she becomes one as the fact that it's a defense of her kids. Same goes for Catelyn, who didn't have much political role. I mean, apart from the fact that she has a good marriage, and so she's not oppressed within that particular framework, but she becomes a leader once there is nobody else, and plus she defends the kids. For Lady Jessica of Atreides is a similar story. She functions like mother. It's also the only time that she actually dares to disobey the order, the religious order that was given to her not to give birth to a son but to a daughter, and she disobeys because she falls in love, so as a wife, and then she proceeds to actually help him gain power, right? She is a particular character that I just love her, not because she has, I mean, it's just the replics that she has. They're some of the best replics. Yeah? And you can tell, I mean, I don't know if you know who this actress is. Diana Rigg is one of the old grand ladies of British cinema and British television. And you can tell that the producers like her because it's a similar situation with Maggie Smith in Downtown. They get all the best lines. Yeah? And you know that there is something about them that they command. They love them, so, you know. Now, there is some breaking of gender norms. We have some rulers and we have some warriors. They're not generally for a long time. For example, Eowyn here, who in terms of alter ego, you could resemble her to a Joan of Arc. I mean, and it's not that far-fetched because she's known as the Shield Maiden. The other one was the Maiden of Orleans. And if you replace the head, she's actually, the way she's dressed is very similar to Joan of Arc. But it's not for a long time. So yes, she wants to go to battle, and yes, she wants to do great deeds, but she falls in love, and then she falls at the end, right? And then she falls within a conventional role. So this role doesn't last. Yeah? Same for this one. The only one that actually, she is a political animal, Cersei, but she's not very good at it. And she's not really in charge. Yeah? And she's been told 100 times that she's not very good at it, both by the little brother and by her father. Right? The one that goes for power for herself, which is not even historically that common, is Daenerys. And it's, you know, backwards, it's like Eleanor of Aquitaine, which was the first woman to actually run after power in and of herself and rise against her husband, which was unknown at the time. And this is a similar story. She does it because she wants to do it. Yeah? Though she grows into this role, because initially she was somebody's sister and she was played, then she was somebody's wife, and it's once that she is liberated, yeah, and she gains control over a particular weapon, we'll see in a minute, that she grows into this role. Yeah? Now, there are also questions about just war. So most of these fictionalized wars, there is part of, it's either the goal to go to battle to win a war, or war are part of the way they live, like in Game of Thrones. In Lord of the Rings is the goal. It all builds towards a battle, right? So questions do rise as to the fact that they wage war. Yeah? Is it justified, and by who? From Thomas of Aquinas to St. Augustine, what is just war? Well, I'm sorry, do you have legitimate authority? Do you have just cause? Is this proportionate? Are there legitimate means? And is this a matter of last resort? Yeah? If you look in Games of Thrones and in Dune, none of them really fully follow a just war type of scenario. Yeah? In both of these cases, yes, I mean, you could argue it's legitimate. In her case, because her father was deposed, and so she has claim as the only heir. He has claimed to say it was a coup, and the head of the king was assassinated, so I rise against them. In his case, Paul is that wrong was done to his father, so this lineage that goes back, right? Proportionality, well, proportionality may be in the case of Rob, because he raises banners like everybody else. He has an army, yeah? But proportionality in her case, I mean, not everybody has dragons, right? So, I mean, who's going to win the battle? I mean, it's 3 dragons that she has, but it's enough, right? He has everything there is. Right? He has control over the most sought-after resource in the universe. He can, the only one that can secure traveling, right? He can control minds. He has manpower, and he has religion, like I said earlier, right? So he has everything. So proportionality, where? Not much, right? Plus, in all of these 3 cases, you could argue that there is also a question of revenge, which is personal. It's not in the name of others, which just war should actually be. Yeah? There is a situation in which just war applies, and that is Lord of the Rings, because the war is against the oppressor, the power that's coming to occupy, right? But Lord of the Rings, it's actually more black and white, the good guys and the dark guys. The Game of Thrones, like Dune, is more messy, and therefore the causes for war are also messier. Okay? The weapons, and what type of weapons do they use? Apart from the conventional weapons, we have unconventional weapons, and this shows the difficult, I mean, you think that in the international world they have difficulty now to sign an unconventional weapon treaty. Look here, because they don't. I mean, that shows that demilitarization and agreement to control non-conventional weapons is not that easy. There is a difference between nuclear weapons, which are not that many, and they're hard to get, and that's what makes her singular. Yeah? And the fact that everybody knows, I mean, they say at some point when she goes, the audience, people in front of her would say, we bow to the dragons. So the leaders, the whatever, okay, but the dragons are the dragons, right? And not everybody has them. Okay? Same story, though I don't have it here, goes for Dune. In Dune, nuclear weapons, they were only the big families. They're known as atomic families, and these are the only ones that have them. Yeah? So it's a matter of who has control. It's almost like with Iran and with North Korea. Who has them, and the ones who have them don't want to give it to anybody else. That's it. Okay? Now, the difference between nuclear weapon and chemical weapons is that chemical weapons have a multiplier effect. Tyrion has no problem to produce it. He could produce others as well, right? So these ones are a little more democratic, or in any case, easier to transfer. Yeah? What is interesting with the use of chemical weapons, at least here, is that he uses it in defense. And so you will have no question rise during that event or after of morality, because it's seen as a justified means because they're attacked. Okay? All right. Now, in this world, though they don't have Prism, and they don't have internet, and they don't have whatever else, though I'm pretty sure that the popularity of this series benefit internet, but the worlds don't have it. Yeah? It doesn't mean that they don't have surveillance and spies. And this is a world in which the spy masters, one of them who's known as Spider, right, they excel. Right? They get information from different sources. This one more unconventional, through the brothels, and this one more in the usual expectation that you have of informants everywhere. The wizard world also has informants, yeah? And it raises a question of collaboration. The fact that the question, the same way that the question is risen in the post-communist world, what did you do for 40 years and who did you report to? Now, the wizards, or the wizard world, has some luck, because there is a way to justify that gets you out of trouble, to say that you were imperious, so you were under a spell that took away your will. Yeah? I bet you'll find hundreds of thousands of informers in Eastern Europe. They'll be happy to say we were under imperial, right? It's also a world that is racist, like the mudbloods in Harry Potter or the wildlings. They're secondary citizens. They're not. This is not a homogenized middle-class society, 90%, 80%, right? So it's interesting, the fascination with words that are have very rigid social structures that do not mix, and nobody crosses them, and it's not acceptable to cross them. The environmental themes. Now, Dune, before everybody else, was the first environmental epic, because it's a planet that has no water, and ecology is a goal in and of itself. This is the first case in which environmental themes are shown to have the political power. It's environmental themes that drive a revolution. He promises a green planet. This is how he gets the freemen to follow him. Right? Out of a planet that, like I said, had no water. Avatar, I mean, it's acknowledged, it's been said that this was an environmentalist movie, an anti-corporatist green movement type of story. Winter is coming. Now, with Game of Thrones, there's a difference. There's not necessarily environmental themes, but natural disasters. There's also a book, I think, on the politics of mitigating risks. And what they do here, because since it's a natural disaster, climate change, whatever, that's the wall. The wall is a way of mitigating risks against potential natural disaster. Yeah? Now, I started by saying that fantasies feed from reality, and they use alter egos and allegories. Now, the fun part is that at some point, they take a life in and of themselves, that they come back into real politics and real life, and they're used to help analyzing current events, and what's happening now. Okay? Whether to create alter egos caricaturally wise, like with the Game of Thrones, or to actually explain what's going on. For the Euro crisis, I mean, if you think about it, you have a South that's indebted and a North that has to come to the rescue. We don't know how that one's going to finish, because the first one didn't finish well. Right? The current Dutch foreign minister has given a speech in London, I think, in which he actually used or talked about, it's not a spectacular speech if you read it or if you hear it, but it became an internet sensation because it's constructed upon quotes from Game of Thrones. Huh? There's one Game of Thrones, and he links it to something that happened in European politics and explains it that way. In Iran 4 years ago, after the elections, the authorities, because you might remember that there were demonstrations, there were challenges to those elections, the authorities decided that to pacify the population, to be a good idea to run Lord of the Rings for the whole day. Huh? And what happened, and what Twitter showed that it happened, was that they interpreted in rebellious terms, and so they identify Ahmadinejad to Soren and not vice versa, and it actually spurred rebellion, not, you know, pacify them, okay? And for sure, you know that you make it, and it's unfortunate because it's too slow and I can't run it, that you make it when The Simpsons use you. So when it becomes, the Simpsons had an episode that was grounded entirely on the Game of Thrones, and the beginning of the episode started with the music and everything else. And I would have liked to finish like that because it would have made for dramatic effect, but such is life. Thank you. I'll take questions. Yes?
Well, you said that Lord of the Rings is some kind of glorified Machiavelli, but well, Martin left without heroes in one moment in the 5th book. So isn't it in a way showing the flaws in Machiavelli's thinking that if you are running just for power, you'll suddenly run out of people?
Machiavelli has been unfortunate to some degree because the way that he's more quoted than he's read. And he is more known for his negative dimension, and he has entered, you know, common vocabulary as a word. I mean, Machiavellian is linked to being, I mean, it's pejorative. And it's not entirely fair because Machiavelli's theory, when he was a proponent of republic, and that's why he ends in trouble with twice with the Florence rulers. So Machiavelli's thinking is not necessarily a thinking or a theory that doesn't have power of explaining what's happening or positive dimension to explain what's happening. Yeah? But it's not Lord of the Rings as much that is Machiavellian, but Game of Thrones that has been accused of being Machiavellian. Yeah? Anyone else? Yes?
It's very nice approach. I have a stupid question. Can we predict something? Economic shocks with this approach? No, we can just analyze what happened.
Well, I'm not a professor of economics. I have a degree in economics for reasons passing understanding. But I know that there are actually guys that are trying either to teach economic theory based on this. There was actually, I've learned that in this institution about 10 or 15 years ago, there was a guy that taught the economics of fiction. He's not anymore here. But so clearly you could. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that you guys didn't give it a thought, but I don't see why not. Yeah. There is economics here as well. Yeah. Yes?
I don't know if it's on topic or not, but you did mention it, and I don't know if you watched the film, probably watched it before and later. I want to hear what's your opinion on the correlation in the current situation in both the movie itself.
I mean, it took a life of its own because the anonymous and power of the people and whatever, so it struck a chord. In terms of British history, that's I mean, it's kind of funny because the story itself on which it's based is not a story of success. Guy Fawkes was not particularly clever and he didn't manage to do anything. But the way in which the movie actually spoke to the audience, that showed that there was an appetite from the audience to hear something of an anonymous, impersonal force that is the people that can rise against the establishment. Yeah. But what I found funny was this, that it was grounded upon a historical story that has very little glorious about it, and that it becomes a glorious story in the way that it's done. Yeah. I mean, it's true, I couldn't have run all of them, but yes, it's a good example. Something, anything. Do you buy this, what I said about just war? Somebody said yes. Yeah, so you don't think that they have. So when they go to war, it's not necessarily this. Yes, go.
Well, you mentioned Molly Weasley when you were talking about fiction, but how would you comment, for example, Hermione or Jenny? They're quite independent actors. They're not just in the usual roles.
Sure, but they don't, I mean, they don't dominate the story quite as much as male characters do. There are some characters, because again, and with Harry Potter, they relate to this world of girls' power. So yes, you have some characters that have autonomy, that they have their own agenda, that they follow it, yes. But they don't dominate the story. Yes?
Coming back to gender topic, recent movie, Hunger Games, the girl there is actually the one that has the autonomy, and I think it's coming up more recently that the woman is actually dominating. And there's a guy besides her who doesn't do that.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't put it because I didn't really connect with Hunger Games, I have to say. I found it far too superficial. I mean, it's a pretense, or only the fact that it has a theme that is intellectual that makes it, I mean, that it says more than just 3 things and a half, that makes it a glorious story, not to me. So I found it, I don't know, too basic for, yeah. So okay, it's about reality TV and I get it and that's bad, so what? I mean, give me something else. District 9 was much better story, for example. But I agree that but it's a sign in this ones too, like I said, because they adapt to times. Yeah? So it's not surprising that you see female characters taking over. Yeah? The day we're gonna see Jane Bond, that's gonna be, you know that we made it. Yeah? Yes?
I would say that Hunger Games are not suitable because the motivation of the character there is quite first to protect her sister, after that to protect the guys she liked, and in no moment she's moving anything, she's just symbol all the time. There are others who are pushing her in one or other direction.
So you have an interpretation where she's actually not quite that liberated as it sounds. Yeah? But she gains warrior status a little like we're talking about the wives and the mothers through that role that they become actually active. Yeah? Not in and of themselves. Okay. I'm sorry, what?
What about Galadriel in the Lord of the Rings? Because she's not that much like a mother.
No, but that's why I put it, I mean.
It's her husband. She's not his wife.
Her husband is her husband, but she runs the things. I mean, you know where the pants are, right?
Like she's the ruler, he's just somebody.
And in The Hobbit, she's the only female character, and she only appears 5 minutes. But if it wouldn't be for her, and
Everything, right?
yeah. But that's, I mean, when I had this, and if I missed it, I mean, thanks for picking it up. That's why she's here. But she's particular. She doesn't swing swords. She has other powers, but powers that outlast the others. Yeah, but yes, Victoria.
Well, it's more of a comment, I guess, than a question. But I was just talking to my friends about that. Do you know TV series The Walking Dead?
Yes, I heard about it.
Have you seen it? No. Well, basically, it's a zombie apocalypse, and then there are zombies running around. But there are some characters who say that they're not really dead, they're actual people, so we should not kill them, we should keep them and like wait for the cure or something like that. But no one really listens, they just keep slaying them. So we were just joking, that maybe it's the same way as, like certain social groups where used to be oppressed, social or ethnic or whatever criteria you pick, used to be oppressed, and that, in the film there may be like zombie rights movement or something. But, so, yeah, I guess it's more common, but then do you think like those kind of scenarios could be used to justify, because they say that you cannot really reason with zombies, you can just like clear down, they don't have a brain that's functioning. So what would you say, this kind of logic, if it can be applied, as an argument, or like, these people, they cannot, well, it's not a question.
The question is if you find an alter ego in reality, like to whom would you apply this?
Right, as in like, they're, what they say is that you cannot reason with them, therefore we're just gonna kill them. So like, is there a parallel, I guess, to...
Rwanda, 94, they were cockroaches. You couldn't talk to them. Kill them all. I mean, so in any civil war, ethnic war, in which the opponent is dehumanized so that you can justify murder, yeah, so, because it doesn't matter. I mean, and that's why the Untermenschen was an Untermenschen during, I mean, for the Nazi Germany. So it's a similar story. You can use it for any allegory in which the opponent is reduced to non-human dimension, so that it justifies murder. Yeah, it doesn't carry any moral dimension, any moral responsibility, any justification for cause, right? So yeah, that's what comes to mind. I mean, okay, I saw her first. Yes.
I have a question about power. You mentioned power in a few examples, and I'm just thinking, what about, for example, power, but also curse with the power? For example, Frodo and the ring. Harry Potter and his curse.
That you can acquire power.
Neo, yeah.
Yeah, that's also, I mean, you know, by Morgenthau standards, but it's also a little realist. You acquire power. The point is to acquire power, to maintain power, and to display power. Yeah? Frodo acquires it, has some difficulty to maintain it, for sure doesn't display it. Yeah? Cersei, on the other hand, and the Lannisters display. Yeah? I mean, so... Can you acquire it coming from low? Yes. I mean, it's not necessarily only something that you inherit, but you can grow into it. With Daenerys, it's a similar story. Yeah. But yeah, I agree that you can arrive or acquire powers through different ways. Yeah. Okay, like in the Game of Thrones for the Mad King, right? The fact that he gets to the old Targaryens that you never see, right? But once in office. Or the brother, yeah. The same goes for Paul in Dune. And possibly that's the best example, because he becomes the emperor and he has this phenomenal power through religion, and then he realized that he has no control over his own persona because he has been deified by the population, and he can't escape it. He realized that even if he kills himself, right? So religion in that case was a double-edged sword. It gave him power, but then at the same time it created solitude. Yeah. Just a second. Yes, Pavel.
I was curious about the shares democracy. I mean, how would you look at it in terms of political culture, social capital, civil society?
Whoa. Well, civil society, I don't see. I mean, they had families and clans, and yeah, so civil society, not that much. But they live in. They live in some blissful way that they don't need to worry about these things, so you don't know whether they have them or if they don't have them. Even the fact that I say it's a democracy, it's overstretched because I don't know what else to make them other than, I don't know, the prehistoric age, possibly. I mean, in how they would communities would get together because it was for their common good to be together and then have something that they share. Like post office, this is the only thing they needed. So we don't know more about them to be able to do this. Yeah? And they wouldn't worry, like I said, I mean, about civil society because they don't need it yet. Bojana.
Coming back to the question of power, the same thing happened to Paul's son.
Yeah.
He also became a problem and then realized that he was becoming a problem.
Yes.
But also, I think that it happened in the early sort of sci-fi stories, like I Am Legend, not the movie, the story,
okay.
Where the protagonist eventually realizes that he's the problem. I mean, I don't know if you know what I Am Legend is about, but it's again about the zombie apocalypse, and he's the last man standing, and he eventually realizes that he is the problem because he's being viewed as the monster. So I think that there is this sort of a resurgence of where what we would conventionally view as the good guy is becoming the problem.
Yes, and also because, I mean, this is like the outcome of this type of regimes. But then you realize that these regimes they're not a solution to all problems, and that they create problems in and of themselves, including for their leaders. Yeah? So it might be part of the relativism that they want to introduce, that though you get to these systems are not ideal. yeah? Not even for the guys that rule them.
What do you think is the commentary on democracy that in so much of the literature that it's monarchical, and the only time that you see democracy, because the Shire is not really democracy.
I agree. Yeah.
The only time you see democracies are democracies falling apart or democracies in peril. And so what do you think is kind of, is it democracies are just simply boring?
Well, I have three possible ideas. One is indeed that democracy is boring. I used to teach a course about 5 years ago. I started it. It was called Democracy and Dictatorship. I taught it 2 semesters in a row. They liked it, whatever. But when I asked around, so Professor, dictatorship we love, but democracy? And so as a result, it became the tyranny's course because, I mean, so that's one, yes. The second one, that it may also be that although there is a dogma around liberal democracy, we understand that it's fragile. And that democracy only lasts if it's the only game in town, which means that all players play this game, and it cannot protect against itself. So if the population elects a player that afterwards democratically and legitimately being elected chooses to change the system, then you're going to end up with a different system. So it may be this, the second story, right? And the third, there is a lingering fascination, especially with the, I guess, with the kings and queens and princesses and whatever this brings in terms of magic to the story. Then democracy, I mean, the empire before Paul has a sort of constitutional government a la Napoleon III, but it's but not as interesting. As the end, within this situation, you always have the rising dragon heads of corporations that appear behind them because you have economic actors that play inside. So I guess a little of this. I have another, Ivan.
I mean, you said that the Game of Thrones was written in 1990s, so like the postmodernism and etc. The thing is that it is tolerant towards religion, etc. But it's not tolerant towards feminism. Because I mean, all characters.
A guy wrote it. I mean.
Why so? Why there kind of not any kind of single strong woman character which is kind of ugly?
Okay, interesting. Well, I have a friend of mine who is a self-proclaimed feminist, and I had a conversation with her at some point because one of the critiques to feminist research or feminist studies is that they start research already knowing the answer, right? So they know. So if you're going to look for discrimination, you're going to find discrimination, right? So I asked her, I mean, how do you get out of this? Because clearly, right? And her answer was, well, because you still don't get it. So I have to give you the same story over and over and over again to win the argument. So if I would be to, answer through her lens, it's because the argument hasn't been won. That's why, it may be postmodernism, but feminism hasn't won yet. Yeah? Just a second, yes?
Well, about the curse of power, I mean, what people mean is mostly shown in this scene in The Lord of the Rings when Frodo offers the ring to Galadriel. And when she says him, well, what you want from me? It's a great temptation to become the glorious queen, and I'll be the white queen, and everyone will be on their knees before me. But in fact, it would be another slavery. So that's, I think, what's the problem with power in science fiction, that people just fear that it's even in good hands it would become corruptive and will change one slavery for another.
And you have a similar logic in Harry Potter when Dumbledore, what's his name? Is that Dumbledore? So he refuses to be Minister of Magic because he doesn't trust himself in a position of power, right? So it's the same logic by this, that actually, I mean, they fear what power can do to you and how it can distort human behavior. I had somebody there, yeah.
I had a comment on absence of feminism in Game of Thrones.
Okay, please.
I think George Martin is he's one of the best writers in fantasy world that does women justice, especially male writers. And one that Game of Thrones does have characters, like you mentioned, like take Brienne of Tarth as an example. She's single, she's badass, she's not very pretty. And on the other hand, it's not the point of getting all your female characters to be the badass and don't need anybody, don't need no man kind of characters. The point is to show that in every single position, be it a mother, a daughter, whatever, you can still be a strong woman. You can be anything. You can be vulnerable. You can meet other people, but you can still be a strong person. And you can be a person. You can be multidimensional and not just be a caricature. And he does that very, very well.
Well, what I find funny is that I hear the anti-feminist argument from a guy and the pro-defense from a girl. Which, yes?
I mean, the thing is that kind of they use their beauty as the main tool during, like, sorry I didn't kind of read the book, that's probably kind of my problem. I mean, but the thing is, in the movie they use their beauty as the main tool, and that's why kind of women characters there, like, usually weak. And that's kind of a bit against it. So they kind of clever, there's no doubt, like many of them, majority of them for sure. And but still kind of they use their beauty first, and only them kind of they manipulate men through that, and etc. So
yeah, that's partially because of the society that they live in. They have to adapt. They have to be smart about it. And also the producers of the show are huge misogynists. So.
Because you need ratings. Because historically speaking, from what we know, Cleopatra was not quite the epitome of beauty that she's made out to be, and neither was Anne Boleyn. And yet, what happened with Henry VIII, and we have a new church as a result. But so reality doesn't match this, but then reality was not on TV. Katarina, did I?
I just want to say that I don't know any TV series without beautiful actresses and actors. I mean, who wants to watch?
Well, the zombies do okay, and are they beautiful or pretty or the zombies? Because she says, they're none without pretty faces. And not entirely true. Yes.
About why people prefer monarchies and great balance. Do you think that they find democracy boring? Because if you have a very nasty hero, you can bring him just on the next elections, and there is no real story that can go.
Well, but then if you ask Freud, he'll say that we're all masochists. So you want to look for, that's the type of environment that it's stimulating, that you look at to see what's happening. I mean, it's more interesting to look at an environment like this than an environment that is benevolent. No.
Yes. In democracy, you just can't have a real fight because everything can be solved in one day of just throwing forth and back some papers.
It's not as spectacular, right, the battle. The battle is in arguments and paperwork, yeah. I agree.
Yes?
Doesn't Star Wars have an interesting approach towards power? You have two groups, both the Sith and the Jedi, which individually are very powerful. But you have the Sith which use all means necessary to acquire more state power. So isn't that kind of an interesting approach where you have the powerful ones which simply don't use unscrupulous means to gain it, and the Sith will use any means necessary to gain power?
Is that an interesting, scenario of power, fights over power and acquiring power? Yeah. Yes. I mean, that you have equally balanced groups almost that fight over power. That's true. Yeah. I don't disagree.
Using unethical means to acquire much more of it. So isn't this kind of like the idea that if you don't have power, you will do anything to keep it, to get it, and if you have power, you will do anything to keep it?
Sure. Yeah. But so it's still a realist type of thinking as to how you act in relation to power. No? I mean, the scenario doesn't change there. But I agree to what you say, but the thinking or the way it's happening is a realist scenario in that case. Yes?
In the Matrix, how would you describe Zion as a society? The real world.
How would you describe it?
I don't know, just always found it extremely interesting the fact that people actually prefer living there.
But if you think about it, I mean, it's just people getting drunk and having sex all the time.
I don't know, because it's so much more, I don't know, basic, like doesn't have anything. They're not even civilized, they have the machinery, but they show that it's not a civilized world. I don't know how. Always found it.
But the rules of the game are basic and clear. Like, you know what the lines are, you know what the rules are, you know what to do, rather than a complicated story in which you have to continuously balance between what's good and what's wrong, and should I and shouldn't I. Yeah? It has more clear lines that you have to follow. And that makes it easier to live. You know. Yeah? Thank you very much for coming. Stay warm.
This program is brought to you by AUBGTalks. For more, please visit us at aubg.edu/talks.